The Cuban people condemned the actions of the U.S. imperialism against Venezuela at an act of solidarity in Havana. The indigenous peoples of northern Ecuador continue their struggle and reject the agreements reached between the government and an indigenous nation from the northern mountains. And Peru's interim Prime Minister Ernesto Álvarez announced from Lima that a state of emergency will be imposed in the capital to combat insecurity. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. On Friday, the Cuban people condemned the actions of U.S. imperialism against Venezuela in an act of solidarity that took place in front of the statue of Liberator Simón Bolívar on President's Avenue in Havana. In response to the recent approval of covert CIA operations against the Bolivarian nation by the Donald Trump administration, the first Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba and President of the Republic, Miguel Díaz-Canel, presided the event in support of Venezuela and his counterpart, Nicolás Maduro. In this scenario, the Cuban people denounced the threat of war to which the Caribbean is subjected due to U.S. interference and remember the historical ties that unite Cubans and Venezuelans. The key speech of the event was in charge of the member of the Political Bureau, Roberto Morales Ojeda, who made it clear that in this context of constant aggression against the people of Latin America, Venezuela is not alone. We are united by the conviction by the decision that nothing will stop the Bolivarian revolution. That certainty was already expressed by the revolutionary leader, Cuban revolutionary leader, General of Army Raúl Castro Ruz, and also President Nicolás Maduro in 2017. Nicolás Maduro expressed, for sure, there will come days of strong battle, of international harassment, of blockades, of limitations, but also it will be days of creation, of work for the revolutionaries and the whole people of Venezuela that as it have been showing until today, it is not alone, and we'll have Cubans in the first line of the struggle, more committed with their cause than ever. That's the end of the quote. For his part, the Vice President of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, Pedro Infante, highlighted the strong bonds that unite the peoples of Cuba and Venezuela.
Venezuela y Cuba somos dos pueblos hermanos.
Venezuela and Cuba are brotherly peoples who represent the legacy of struggle for liberation and independence, embodied by Bolívar and San Martín, whose flags are an essential part of the Cuban Revolution and the Bolivarian Revolution. We are nations of peace whose peoples and governments are victims of supremacism and terrorism by U.S. imperialism and its war-seeking lobbyists.
Moreover, Infante condemned the acts of xenophobia and the criminalization of Latin American migrants by the United States government.
From this place, we join the call made by our President Nicolás Maduro to condemn the xenophobic statements comparing the Venezuelan identity to criminal groups. We also denounce and reject the campaign against Latin American migrants and their extrajudicial persecution in the United States. We welcome and appreciate the dignified, exemplary position taken by President Díaz-Canel when he pointed out on September 24th, when he began the process of collecting signatures in solidarity with Venezuela, urging that military aggression against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela be prevented.
And Venezuela denounced the United Nations Security Council the extrajudicial executions by the United States in the Caribbean Sea and threats against the country. The permanent representative of Venezuela to the United Nations, Samuel Moncada, warned about the new and dangerous developments in the U.S. escalation in the Caribbean Sea over the last few days. Moncada explained that on October 14th, the U.S. government attacked a small boat that was in a stationary position a few miles off the Venezuelan coast. Among the victims were 2 fishermen from Trinidad and Tobago, and in this regard, the Venezuelan government called on the United Nations Security Council to launch an investigation to clarify the murders perpetrated by U.S. forces in the Caribbean against the small boats near the Venezuelan coast, which Washington has labeled without evidence as narco boats.
Yesterday, on October 14, 2025, the government of the United States of America carried out a new set of extrajudicial executions against civilians who were aboard the small stationary boat in the Caribbean Sea, just a few miles off the coast of Venezuela. Recent reports of public domain have identified 2 humble fishermen from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago among the victims. Their relatives indicate that those who were assassinated were engaged in fishing activities at the time. This act is yet another chapter in the escalation of the U.S. strikes carried out since September to date against civilian vessels transiting international waters in the Caribbean Sea.
In this context, in Trinidad and Tobago, families of the fishermen killed by the illegal U.S. attacks on vessels are demanding answers and justice from Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar's government. As time goes by, new details continue to emerge about the criminal operation led by the Pentagon and backed by the Trinidadian government, which has left at least 21 people dead. In this context, the family of Chad Joseph, one of the Pentagon's victims, claims that he had already survived a previous attack, pointing out that the boat he was on at the time also had women on board. The fisherman had delayed his return to the country out of fear of another attack, a fear that sadly proved justified. The families reject accusations labeling him a drug trafficker, while local residents denounce the secrecy and violence of the Pentagon's operations. And on Thursday, the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of America People's Trade Treaty, ALBA TCP, issued a statement rejecting U.S. interference in Venezuela. The alliance condemned the recent statements by U.S. President Donald Trump, who admitted to having authorized covert operations against the peace and stability of the Bolivarian nation. In its declaration, ALBA TCP described these actions as a violation of Venezuelan sovereignty and international law, denouncing the historical intervention of the United States in the region. The organization backed Venezuela's position in the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, and supported the presentation of the case before the United Nations Security Council to stop any attempt at aggression. And now we have a short break coming up. First, remember, you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Friday in Venezuela, the armed forces activated the Integral Defense Zone SODI in the states of Mérida, Trujillo, Lara, and Yaracuy as part of the Independence 200 plan. In the SODI of the state of Mérida, the security and defense forces remain active with the objective of guaranteeing the defense of the territory in a perfect popular military-police fusion. In this sense, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro affirmed that the actions being taken to ensure the defense of the Venezuelan region constitute a mechanism for achieving peace and confronting threats in any circumstance. With the activation of the SODI, there are now 33 active defense zones in which the deployment of forces continues to guarantee the comprehensive defense of the nation. In other news, on Thursday, Cuban parliamentarians reiterated the rejection of the economic blockade and coercive measures imposed by the United States against the island. During a public hearing held in Havana, the capital of the country, the deputies denounced that the sanctions imposed by Washington limit the use of currency in international transactions, hindering access to medicines and medical supplies and obstructing financial relations with other countries. In this scenario, parliamentarians also warned that the White House's policies impact strategic sectors such as energy, mines, and preventing the acquisition of technologies and slowing down investment projects. The public hearing was held as a prelude to the vote in the United Nations General Assembly, where Cuba will once again demand an end to the blockade. And the indigenous peoples of northern Ecuador continue their struggle and reject the agreements reached between the government and an indigenous nation from the northern mountains. In this context, the CONAIE, which is the Confederation of Indigenous Nations, has called a General Assembly for this Friday to confirm that the resistance to the government's policies continues. Precisely at a meeting held on Thursday in the town of Otavalo, the epicenter of the protest in the north of the territory, indigenous peoples rejected the agreements reached by a few sectors with the government of President Daniel Noboa. In this regard, they assured that they will not lift the resistance since the demands that gave rise to the mobilizations have not been heard, and condemned the 3 deaths, 282 injured and 15 missing due to the police repression. And in Argentina, since the government of Javier Milei, 216 journalists have been attacked. Reporters have become the favorite target of repression. Let's see more in the following material.
On Wednesday, March 12th, during the ongoing protests by Argentina's retirees, reporter Pablo Grillo was about to take a photo of the scene that unfolds almost every Wednesday, a barricade on fire, and behind it, the repressive forces of the government. Pablo Grillo did not see that one of the gendarmes aimed at his head and fired, shattering his skull. Pablo is still recovering. His father tells us how.
Pablo sigue en recuperación. Su padre nos cuenta cómo.
Pablito está mucho mejor.
Pablito is much better. His progress is very good. We had a period where we were a little scared.
Estábamos medio asustados, viste, que no era como que no progresaba.
He wasn't making progress because that's how it was. There was a peak, then he developed hydrocephaly.
Y bueno, ahora está bien, está mejor, más activo, más proactivo.
No, he's better. More proactive. He had a kind of delay. You would ask him something, and it would take him a while to answer.
Un buen rato en contestarte, ¿sí?
Son 7 meses de idas y venidas.
It has been 7 months of ups and downs, as the reporter lost a significant amount of brain matter in the shooting, requiring several operations.
Pero estuvo hace un par de meses, volvió a...
He stayed that way for a couple of months, returned to Ramos Mejia to have the prosthesis fitted, and after weeks, a month, he came back here to Roca to do rehabilitation.
Semanas, un mes aproximadamente, volvió acá al Roca a rehabilitación.
The progress is slow as we had been warned, but it is steady.
Nos advirtieron que iba a ser lenta, pero es constante.
Los padres, el hermano,
His parents, brother, and some friends take turns caring for him, and people show him respect and affection.
Sí. Gracias, amigo. Te agradezco mucho. Gracias.
El gobierno lo acusó de ser...
The government accused him of being a dangerous extremist, but did they talk to them?
Mira, del gobierno nacional absolutamente nadie.
Absolutely no one from the national government. Nothing more than the media messages released by Bullrich Adorni, who is pathetic, claiming that we cut off communication.
¿Cómo es que se llama? Adorni, que es patético.
We never cut anything off because no communication was ever established. If anyone cut off communication, it was Bullrich's lies, who lied from the outset and continues to lie.
Alguien cortó la comunicación fue con las mentiras de Bullrich. De entrada mintió y sigue mintiendo.
Las y los fotógrafos.
Photographers continue to be the preferred target of the repressive forces of the Argentinian current government.
Desde Buenos Aires para teleSUR, Fabián Restivo.
In other topics, this Thursday, Peru's interim Prime Minister Ernesto Álvarez announced from Lima that a state of emergency will be imposed in the capital to combat insecurity. Social and human rights organizations believe that the real intention is to contain the protests demanding the resignation of the executive and legislative branches. The president of the Council of Ministers also pointed out that they are preparing a series of measures that will form a package to combat crime. In fact, one of the demands of the population, which has been going on for some time, is the lack of guarantees for public safety. However, the protests following the removal of the then President Dina Boluarte demand the resignation of the entire interim government and the congressional leadership as the only way to reorient the nation's future. And now we have a second show break coming up. Before, we invite you to visit our Facebook page at teleSUR English. There you'll be able to watch our top stories, special live coverage and much more. Follow our page and activate the notification button to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final show break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to From the South. In the United States, the militarization of major democratic cities has pro-immigrant communities and organizations on high alert. New York could be Trump's next target for National Guard deployment, and our correspondent Henry Camelo tells us more on the matter.
La armonía, el dinamismo y la
The harmony, dynamism, and good vibes that many consider to be one of New York's distinctive features could soon turn into chaos like Los Angeles and Chicago if Donald Trump's threats to militarize this city are carried out.
Nos encontramos en la avenida Junction Boulevard.
We are on Junction Boulevard, where the largest number of undocumented immigrants in Queens County are concentrated. This would be the epicenter of the militarization of the National Guard here in New York City.
Aquí en la ciudad de Nueva York.
En esa calle existen cientos de negocios
There are hundreds of informal businesses on this street, which many undocumented immigrants have set up with great sacrifice in search of their daily livelihood. Sabina is an example of this.
What time do you get up to work?
A las 6 y nos vamos a las 10 de la noche.
We get up at 6 in the morning and leave at 10 p.m. and when we have to go to the market, we finish working here at 10 p.m. and return at 4 or 5 a.m. We work more than 22 hours. I don't think anyone works as hard as we do. We work on the street. We endure the cold, the wind, the heat, all winter, summer, fall, all year long we are out here, and paying a permit of $25,000 or $20,000. I think it's time for them to listen to us, to hear our voice.
Que se oiga nuestra voz. Para mí, todos los que compran son personas.
All those who buy are people who come without their papers, are good people. Hard-working people, this would be a disaster.
Y por ejemplo, para mí sería un desastre.
Daniel, como organización, ¿qué están haciendo ustedes?
What are you doing in response to the arrival of the National Guard in New York?
Pues sí, estamos mirando y hablando con...
We are talking and looking at our allies in other cities quite frequently, trying to understand what they are going through, the work they are doing there in those communities.
Están haciendo ahí en esas comunidades y lo que nosotros estamos tratando de hacer a nivel de la ciudad acá es educar a nuestros pues vecinos, migrantes.
And what we are trying to do at the city level here is to educate our neighbors, migrants, citizens, everyone, basically, because we are all going to have a role to play in terms of what our constitutional rights are.
De comunicación a nivel del vecindario.
Se estima que en Nueva York existen aproximadamente...
It is estimated that there are approximately 2 million undocumented immigrants in New York, according to official data. Their contribution in taxes to the state in 2024 was $3 billion. Business owners believe that militarization and immigration raids would be devastating for the economy.
The business is completely over. If now, with what is happening here, the business has not been very strong, it has declined by more than 50%. Not to mention the raids and the National Guard. People is scared because this is an area where there are many immigrants.
And what should be done when the National Guard arrives in New York? Sabina is clear about this.
Well, I have to go back to my country because my children are now citizens here, and I am the only one in my family without documents.
Pero la última palabra aún no está dicha.
But the final word has not yet been spoken, as New York continues to fight back, and this Saturday will demonstrate all its strength and resistance in the streets when thousands of people unite to tell Trump, there are no kings here.
Pablo Daniel Ho y Henry Camelo, teleSUR, Nueva York.
In Gaza, the entry of humanitarian aid faces constant blockades due to the actions of Israeli settlers and the continued closure of the Rafah border crossing despite the ceasefire agreement. Groups of Israeli settlers blocked trucks carrying humanitarian aid at the Karem Abu Salem border crossing, which is still under Zionist control. In addition, the Rafah crossing, vital for medical evacuations and the movement of people and supplies, remains closed. These blockades are taking place while the United Nations World Food Programme is urging action to combat widespread famine in Gaza. According to the organization, only 560 tons of food have arrived since the ceasefire began, which is insufficient given the scale of the humanitarian disaster caused by Israeli aggression. And the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees reported the destruction and inaccessibility of almost all agricultural land in the Gaza Strip. According to the United Nations Agency, 2 years of genocide against Gaza led to the loss of income for families dependent on agriculture as a means of livelihood due to the destruction of or inability to access their land. The entity also about possibility of the Gazan population buying food in the markets and stressed the need to allow humanitarian aid to enter until the agricultural sector in the Strip recovers. In this regard, the Gazan government confirmed on Thursday that the destruction and rubble resulting from the genocide have reached a level unprecedented in modern history. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also, join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok as well. For Telesur English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.